Hello, everybody. My name is Jim, and this is part 2 of my September reading wrap up for 2023. If you didn't catch part 1, that is a list of short stories. I participated in Angelia's Shorty September and talked about a bunch of short stories in that video. It was a lot of fun to participate, even though I didn't get through a short story a day like she did. She dominated the challenge. She got all 30 in 1 month. So if you want to check out her video, or her videos, I guess, wrapping up her short stories that she read, definitely check out her channel. She is awesome. But this is going to be about full books that I either finished or started. Before I get into those, though, I do have to say, confession alert, I did not finish Play the Fool by Lena Chern. It's still on my to-do list. I'm still reading it. I read a little bit more last month, but you can blame my library for releasing holds on books that I wanted to read. I had, a limited amount of time to get to those, and since I have Play the Fool physically at home, I can get to that anytime. But one book I did finish this month is Big Gay Wedding by Byron Lane. I talked about that last month when I wrapped up the first half of the book. I gave this book 4 stars. It's the story of a man, Barnett, who is returning home. He's going back to his family's farm and the house that he grew up in, located in a very small town that isn't so accepting of the wedding that he wants to throw for himself and his fiancée Ezra. This story pretty well encapsulates those feelings of anxiety going back to a place that's so familiar but is still so unwelcoming because of who you are. I wouldn't expect anything less from somebody who has lived this experience. There were some reviews that didn't really appreciate Chrissy, the mother's perspective. She did take up a lot of the book. Over time, because I gave her a little bit of a hard time when I wrapped this up last month too, but over time I appreciated her perspective. Sometimes it's good to see that side who's kind of on the fence of coming around and learning how to accept, appreciate, and value someone in her life who is in a same-sex relationship. But I completely understand why people didn't necessarily vibe with her perspective. Obviously, you want to go into this book for some gay joy, and that kind of poo-poos on it. But some of the negatives, I would say, is that Byron Lane is... this is not going to sound like a negative. He is a naturally funny writer. The story was funny. I laughed out loud a number of times. He has that gift. But one of the problems that I think funny people, naturally funny people, have is that they tend to try too hard in some spots when they really don't need to, because they do have that natural talent, and they just drive the humor over a cliff. And I think he did that in a number of places, specifically as it related to some of the characters, like Nicole, for instance. Her contributions, and I feel like I'm in the minority with this because a lot of reviews loved her, but I just thought that she was too much of a caricature, and a lot of the things that she said and did just weren't my type of humor. There were also some cases of homophobia that happened in this story that were too quickly resolved, in my opinion. Again, that's that cynical side that I talked about with the short stories that I read. It's just something that I didn't believe necessarily. I thought it was a bit too convenient, but on the other hand, I also understand that Byron Lane did not want to harp on the negative too much, because this is supposed to be a joyous, fun, lighthearted, funny book, which a lot of people are comparing to Schitt's Creek. I can definitely see that. I just think Byron Lane went a little bit overboard with some of the caricatures, but I could definitely see where that connection is being made. So if this sounds interesting to you, I gave it a 4-star rating. It's a romance without all of those romance tropes that you get with dating and falling in love for the first time. The next book that I read in full is Sundial by Katrina Ward. This was recommended by Michaela at Michaela Reads, and I believe Allie at Allie Read a Book recommended this as well. So I said, you know what the heck? both of those people that I watch raved about this book. They enjoyed it so much that I felt like I needed to read it too. I gave this 5 stars. The basic premise is that this woman, Rob, is in a very toxic, gaslighting, manipulative, awful marriage with this man who is just the absolute worst. And she also discovers that her daughter, her oldest daughter, is like a bone collector. So she's finding these dead animals in her driveway and she doesn't know where they come from. She checked her oldest daughter's room, I believe, and she found like this stash of bones. And she said, you know what? We have to get out of here. I want to take my oldest daughter to the place where I grew up and kind of tell her about my past, my history, my story growing up in this place called Sundial. So that's the setup. That's like the beginning of the book. Katrina Ward sets the scene so well. She establishes each character's place in the family dynamic, but I didn't trust a single person reading this story. The narrators, so we had Rob and Callie, they were both so unreliable. I didn't trust either of them the whole time, but of course I didn't trust the father. I didn't trust anyone in this story. It was wild, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it because it kept the story tense. It kept me wanting to find out more about Rob's backstory and where she grew up. Interestingly, though, I expected this story to be about one of those places in the desert where, it's like a religious cleansing or something. Everybody sits in a really hot tent and they kind of meditate and cleanse themselves. I don't know if you've heard of those. I don't know exactly what those are, but for some reason I thought that that's what this story was going to be about. I was dead wrong. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. But this was an amazing story, despite not being exactly what I expected it to be. Not that I was necessarily looking for that. But yeah, I will say there are instances of animal testing, animal cruelty. Obviously, I also mentioned, domestic abuse, domestic violence. There are some other trigger warnings, so be careful going into this. Make sure that you look into that a little bit more. One of the things that I did not really care for in this book is that there's another perspective called Arrowwood, which is a bit meta. It's a book within a book. It's a book that Rob, who is a school teacher, it's a book that she's writing on the side. I don't think that it was necessary. It kind of broke up the plot a little bit. It didn't make me lose the plot necessarily, but I could see it possibly doing that for someone else. So if you read this, I don't think that you will miss anything if you skip the Arrowwood chapters. And then finally, this book, I'm about 72% of the way through. It's Speak No Evil by Uzodimma Iwala. I read his short story Anonymous last month as well. I really enjoyed his writing and his prose, so I decided to pick another book out from him, although I should have taken a hint from Anonymous that his writing is very heavy. It's dark, it's deep, it has a way of pounding my emotions. I should have taken notes from Anonymous because this book is equally as rough to read. This is a YA novel. And I will say, with it being a YA novel, I don't know if he is a YA author, but in this book, in the very beginning, I almost DNF'd it because it kind of came across as teenagers learning how to cuss for the first time, and that really bugs me. That's something that I should have put in my dialogue pet peeves. There were F-bombs everywhere. It was like Mayday. After that first chapter, it matured. His writing matured, and that issue kind of went away. But I kind of wonder if he was writing YA and he was trying to appeal to that younger audience, and that's why he did that. But this is the story about a boy named Niru. He is 18 years old. He is the child of an affluent Nigerian American family who love to keep up appearances. Niru also has this friend named Meredith who has a crush on him. There's a snowstorm. He ends up in her house. She wants to take it a bit further. He agrees, but is a bit reluctant, but, he agrees anyway. And he eventually comes out to her and tells her that he's gay, which is what causes everything to snowball. His father is extremely conservative, and his mother, I guess, is too, just in their opinions about homosexuality. That's the setup for this book. It is very heavy, what I've read so far. There is a lot of religion-based discrimination, which is something that, unfortunately, I've had to deal with. It's just rough. It's a rough book. There's abuse in the family. It's a tough read so far, but I'm getting through it. It's 72% of the way through, and I'm expecting this to be a 4-star read, mostly because the beginning was pretty difficult to get through because of the constant swearing. I don't usually mind swearing, but if it comes across that way, where it's like teenagers learning to swear for the first time, it's just not something that I get into. But again, Uzodimma Iweala's writing is so mature afterwards that it kind of makes up for it, but not quite. But because I almost DNF'd this book, I do think that 4 is the highest I can give it. But like I said, in the short stories, he is an auto borrow or an auto buy for me. So I am looking forward to reading some more of his books in the future. If I need my heart ripped out and stomped on, I can look for a book written by him and read it and, feel all the feels. I don't know if I can do 2 of his books in a month again, because again, this one's pretty rough. So that is what I read in September. Part 2. So if you're interested in watching the video on the short stories that I read, be sure to watch part 1. If any of these books that I mentioned in this video interest you, check out the description below. I've left their Goodreads links in there. Click on those. Check the books out for yourself, as well as some of the reviews. And if you are further convinced, be sure to check these books out from your library or your library app if they are available, or go to a store and purchase them if you're feeling brave and you just know you're going to love them. Otherwise, I've been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading.